Hi, this is Father Bill W. here in Austin, Texas, and I want to welcome you to the podcast. I am an Episcopal priest in long-term recovery from alcoholism. And these podcasts are my attempt to explore some of the history and the spirituality of 12-step recovery. The hope is that we can go a little bit deeper into both, and that will be a help to you in your own recovery process. And if you have not done so already, I would encourage you to please visit our website. It is called TwoWayPrayer, TWO, TwoWayPrayer. And there you can sign up for a newsletter that we send out every month to 6 weeks. Also hope you will attend one of our workshops. I'm trying to do these monthly at different times of the month, and they're presented on Saturday from 10 to 12:30 Central Standard Time. The next one coming up is January the 15th, and that'll be on the history of the 12 steps and looking at the steps from an historical perspective, what it is we can learn from the Oxford group practice and some of the early AA practices that were going on. My hope is it'll really make the steps simpler. You know, I think we have complicated the hell out of these things, and it's too bad. Just seems to be the way things go. They just get incrustations that kind of add to them over the years, and I think it makes it hard for newcomers to sift through it. So that's my hope. We've had some good responses so far from that workshop, so I hope you will make it. If you need a flyer for that, you can write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I will be happy to send that to you. So with that business out of the way, we are starting a whole new series, and I'm really excited about it. It's on William James and his book, Varieties of Religious Experiences. And my guest is Paul S. And let me give you a little bit of his background. Paul has a career in finance, government, and in the private sector, teaching law, finance, and diplomacy. He was in the seminary for several years and received advanced degrees from Catholic University of America and from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in a joint program with Tufts and Harvard universities. And hang on to that Harvard University thing, because there's some synchronicity there that will come back when we get to William James. And Paul was also credentialed along the way as a drug and alcoholism counselor from Marymount College. He is in long-term recovery from alcoholism, and he makes his home both in Singapore and in Barcelona. And he is joining us for this series from his home in Barcelona. And most recently, Paul is the author of what I consider a really important book, and it is titled We Agnostics: How William James Advanced a Spiritual Solution to Addiction. And I will put a link to that in the show notes. And I'd really encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. I think it is extremely important, and it's a study of variety of religious experience, but it's an attempt to make it accessible to people in recovery. And that, I think, is something that has been badly, badly needed. So it's a book that Bill Wilson read in detox after he had his white light spiritual experience, and he studied it diligently afterwards, trying to make sense of what happened to him in that process. So I think this is really important material. So welcome, Paul. It is really good to have you. Good to have you, and looking forward to this. And I wonder if you could begin by sharing how was it that you came to be interested in William James? And when was
Well,
that?
I sort of dragged my ass into, sort of needing help because I was drinking quite a bit. And I come from a family which is really racked with alcoholism. I got, like, on my mom's side, Irish, and my dad's side is a little bit American Indian. So I'm like, we were all doomed from the beginning. And so we have 10 kids in my family, and 9 out of 10 are, have problems with alcohol and so forth. And so, my father and my brother both died of alcoholism, and I just didn't have any capacity for grieving. And I think that's a very it's a very common mark of an alcoholic personality, is that emotional shutdown.
Yes.
And especially the inability to grieve. And so, boy, oh boy, booze becomes a pretty good way to grieve, And so I just kind of dragged my ass into a room, and I sat down and I listened, and I looked at this thing called, the Big Book. And then I was reading this, guy named William James. I really didn't know about him very well. And certainly had never heard of Varieties of Religious Experience. And then when you get to the back of the Big Book, you have Appendix 2, which was put in, I guess, in the second edition.
Correct.
And that was where, Bill Wilson said, this is the only major change we made to the Big Book ever, was to add this quotation from the Varieties of Religious Experience, and a description of how William James describes this search for a higher power through some kind of slow or quick process of something which is, words are being thrown, spiritual psychology, moral psychology was being thrown around, and that's really the dead center of William James's stuff. And so I picked up the book and I started reading it.
What was it about James that appealed to you in reading it? I tried reading it. It's a difficult book, and that's why I think it's so important that you did this work to make it accessible. But tell us a little bit about James, who he was, and his own life. I think he had a spiritual experience himself, didn't he?
Yeah. So he was a weird guy. I think if you'd have known him, you would think he's kind of a weird, eccentric, strange person, and he was always running off in different directions, and boundless energy, and manic, and constantly talking to people. And he was engaged in seances, and of course he would run around in his pajamas around Harvard, as a professor. And so, but sheer genius. I mean, the book he wrote on the principles of psychology is still being used today. It's about a 700-page thing. You look at the great works, right? The great works of human history are there's 70 volumes, right? 70 people are picked out of human history, and you say these are the 70 most important people, including Freud, and in the 20th century, and William James is there. He's one of the 70. And I was like, this guy's really important.
Yeah. So
I picked up the book, and then I realized that this was transcribed from a series of lectures. And of course, we don't talk the way that we write. And so the person who transcribed the lectures of William James in the lecture hall at the University of Edinburgh in 1901, he was a good he transcribed exactly what William James said. And we don't talk in sentences, we talk in fragments, right? And so that's why the book is so damn hard to understand, because it's just pure, it's just so much genius and beautiful imagery and language, but he's
quite poetic. He's quite poetic in his expressions. Yeah.
There was a phrase that that William James was a philosopher who wrote like a novelist, and his brother was a novelist who wrote like a philosopher. His brother,
that's right,
Henry James. And so
they complemented one another, didn't they?
Yeah. And so it's beautiful imagery and almost poetic, but it comes from the point of view of hardcore science and looking at things from an intuitive, pragmatic. This is what works. This is what I observe in my patients. This is what I observe in many of the people I have treated from alcoholism, and in my own experience of what he clearly points out in several paragraphs about 3/4 of the way through the book, his own journey with nitrous oxide and his not so fun adventures with nitrous oxide.
Right, yeah. And he had experiences with depression as well, didn't he?
Plagued with depression, and there was a lot of mental illness in his family. His brother was a terrible alcoholic who died of alcoholism in William James's own house. His sister was a recluse who was very mentally ill and died in her early 40s. They think might have been suicide. And then, of course, his brother Henry was gay and moved to London and never came back to America and lived as an estranged brother in London. And so, and so he himself was plagued with doubt and depression. And you're talking about one of the brightest men of the early 20th century, and he was plagued with self-doubt. And so that's right. And so he had his own experience climbing in the Adirondacks in 1898. And he just had some kind of a spiritual awakening and some sort of breaking with his past self to some realization of hope and clarity and peace of mind that he never had in his life. And so he wanted to explore that. And I strongly believe he also wanted to explore what it was like, what's it like for these alcoholics who are, one day drinking themselves to death, and then the next day they couldn't even consider picking up a drink because he struggled and was probably so deeply hurt by his own brother's descent into alcoholism and madness and eventual death. In, I think, 1908, so about 2 years before William James died, his brother died in William James's own home.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Yeah. Well, he qualifies, doesn't he?
I think that's right. I think he makes it clear in a couple of sentences. Hey, listen, you guys, everyone in the audience, pay attention. I'm talking about my own journey down the road of dangerous nitrous oxide. So I know of what I speak.
Right. Yeah. No. He had the experience, the internal experience of knowing what separation and depression and anxiety and all of those things are, that he could speak from his experience and not just theoretical. And we're gonna get into that a little bit more deeply, because I think that's a really important part of understanding William James. And so what I want to do, my approach to this series is going to be to go through your book chapter by chapter and share with listeners some of the insights that James can give us in going deeper with our own spirituality in our programs, and understanding how his philosophy might help us in approaching each one of the 12 steps, because that's how you approach it in your book. Could you talk about how you patched this together with the big book and the 12 and 12 and such?
Well, that's right. And so what I did is I read the varieties twice, and then I outlined it and put it on a couple of hundred cards. And then I looked and I outlined the big book and then the 12 and 12 and as Bill sees it. And I put those all together. And then I kept on looking for similarities and looking for the patterns. And of course, I wasn't trying to make William James fit into the 12 step. That was not my intention.
Good.
The intention here is to say, this was clearly a profoundly important thing. Bill Wilson was very clear. William James set another candle on the table of our society, is exactly the words that Bill Wilson used. Yeah. William James was critical to his understanding of this spiritual solution. Absolutely. And then, of course, I think that, and then I've had my own scrapes with, and I talked about this with you, Bill, too. I had my own scrapes with some like William James experts and people in the William James camp who don't want him to be associated with this 12-step thing, right? That this is the father of pragmatism and the father of, he had, huge contributions to education and pragmatism and psychology. And yet, come on, I mean, there are dozens and dozens of examples in the book. Roughly the middle third of the book is about people who are addicted to cocaine, nitrous oxide, sleeping pills, alcohol, on and on. And one, William James scholar, accused me of, making things up, because he looked in the back of the index of the book of varieties, and there was no reference to addiction. And it was like, dude, the word addiction wasn't even like developed
Even
until-
alcoholism wasn't usually used.
Amen.
Dipsomania.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
I,
the word that, yeah, that's right.
I was
It
looking
was
for Dipsomaniacs Anonymous, and I couldn't find them.
Right. Well, funny enough, the word that William James is stuck with, and whether it's not a good word nowadays, but it's the word that he used, and there's many, many references to it. Drunkard. That's the word that he used.
Right.
And I there's a couple of times that there's a reference to dipsomania, but he uses the word drunkard. And then he had a lot of patients in his own practice that were addicted to barbiturates, sleeping pills, alcohol, cocaine. Cocaine and nitrous oxide were two of the most used drugs, a lot of opium and heroin. But I would say back in that time, it was cocaine and nitrous oxide.
Yeah. In my own view, I could be wrong on this, but I credit Silkworth with the physical components of addiction, which are important, an allergy of the body, and all that good stuff. And this is where we miss it with James. I think James provides the deeper understanding of what the mental, spiritual component is that is part and parcel of this illness.
That's right, and I mentioned that in the chapter I wrote, that when you try to glue it together, you can see that James comes at it. James never talked about the compulsion or the obsession that kicks off with the first drink. That was Silkworth, And so the two of them coming together really are both sides of the coin, where it is, and I think that's why we have. Step one has step A, 1A and 1B, right? It's the only step that's got two steps. It's like, I'm powerless over alcohol. I can't have the first drink. And then B, that's Silkworth. And then B, my life's unmanageable. That's the William James part, right?
That's
where
right.
They come together.
Yeah. And to me, Paul, that is the piece that people so often miss, is understanding unmanageability. That it has nothing to do with the consequences of getting drunk. I got drunk and I got arrested. I got drunk and this happened. That's not an unmanageable life. An unmanageable life is what's going on deep inside of me, that I cannot go for long without drinking, drugging, treating what's happening in there. And James nails it down as best we can into what's happening. So that's what I want to get to. I like to kind of get to the underbelly here.
That's right.
Of the first step. And your book makes that very clear. He talks about it as a soul sickness. Could you comment on that? And then he talks about us alcoholics and addicts, or us drunkards, whatever we are, as children of wrath. It's that colorful language.
Yeah.
But I think that's what he's getting to. It's something deep is going on there.
Yeah, and so he talks about these children of wrath crave a deliverance from an old self to a new self, and so as a medical doctor, he said, we have to open our eyes and be stone cold about listening to the complaint of these people. And he's very emphatic. And he said, I'm going to be really, clear as a bell here on how awful this predicament is, that this condition. What is the complaint? The complaint is we have opposing thoughts, we have opposing emotions, we are riddled with anxiety, fear, depression, anxiety. Our mind is like a shuttlecock going back and forth during a badminton game. What a great analogy, right? And so he wants to know what causes this. And he concludes, much of what we now know in genetic and epigenetics, that this thing seems to be, a lot of people are born with this. I certainly inherited it from my father, who was an alcoholic, and my mother's father was an alcoholic. And so then we say, okay, well, what in the hell is this? And so it is a sense of isolation of people who are on the outside looking in, that they're on the outside looking in. They see a life where all they see is the worm in the apple. They don't see anything else of the banquet on the table. All they can see is the worm in the apple. And so life is flat.
Right.
Life lacks meaning.
Right.
And so he says, okay, what do these people do? These people seek out spirits. They seek out a mystical experience.
Yes, and they have it. Alcohol delivers that. The drug delivers that initially.
It does deliver.
I got drunk. I got drunk at 12 years old. Was my first drunk, and it's like, my God, where's this stuff been all my life? Because it took me to a place, you know.
Yeah.
And I knew I had a vocation at that moment because I won my bottle of wine at a church bazaar. And if this is what the church is holding in there, I want that.
Yeah, I know, how funny, right? Yeah, and so it's actually in the chapter on mysticism, and I believe the chapter on mysticism, if I'm recalling it, is like chapter 12. The whole thing is like 20 chapters. The whole book is 20 chapters, or it could have been 20 different lectures. But chapter 12
was 20 different lectures delivered over 2 years.
Yeah, and so he says, it is no accident that those people seek alcohol because it offers hints and gleams of mystical excellence.
Yeah.
You know, it's
let me read.
phraseology.
I have the quote in front of me, so let me read it, because then people will get a taste of how he writes. He says, the sway of alcohol over mankind is unquestionably due to its power to stimulate the mystical faculties. It is the great exciter of the yes function. It brings us from the chill periphery to the radiant core. It makes the drinker for the moment one with truth. In the end, though, we're usually returned back to the earth, crushed by the poisonous and cold facts of the sober hour. It's a taste of the spiritual experience, and it comes as a great relief. And that's why, you know, I mean, some people, when they tell their drunkalogs and stuff, it's like, well, I had a happy childhood and off we go. I'm always kind of disappointed in that because I can't relate to it, number one. And number two,
me too, yeah.
I wonder if they are missing something, you know?
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, when I did my work at UCLA, when I did my degree at Loyola Marymount, I did an internship, and we did a lot of work on this. And I think about 70% of people who wash up on you know, these 12-step programs or rehabs have a genetic predisposition, come from very troubled families, and then 30% seem to not come from troubled families.
Yeah.
But I always like a question in my mind. Really, I mean, really, you had a really happy home and happy parents, and right. Because look at my story, Bill, is a little bit different from yours. I didn't start drinking until much later, till I was like 25 or so, 24, after my father died of alcoholism.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee you that I was filled with self-doubt about my impending doom and my impending catastrophe of my life way before I drank. So I had an alcoholic personality way before I had my first, like, you know, persistent, you know, drinking. And so, like, I finished, you know, at summa cum laude at my university, #2 in the university. And I could have, as I'm sitting here right now, I swore I was going to flunk out. You know, this is crazy thinking.
That's right. Yeah. And you know,
the old saying, by the time I had my first drink, I needed it.
That's right. And you know, the relief can not only come through the drinking, it can come in many forms. You know, it can come through food, it can come through compulsive work, you know,
sex,
compulsive worrying.
That's
you know,
right.
It's like, it's the first worry. It opens up this trap door, and I fall through it into the fear, anxiety, and alienation, I think is the way James describes the soul.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Those
and
three words come through all the time.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So we experience that. We go chasing after it, but things only get worse, and then we wind up with an experience. You're talking about the parts of the first step that are there, the two different parts. I actually think there are three, the way I've looked at it, and
Yep.
the one that's missing, I think it comes in the three little dots or the dashes between the two, but it's the word hopeless.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah.
I went back and I looked at the big book and I started underlining every single time it mentions the word hopeless.
Yep.
We suffered from a hopeless condition of mind and
Yep.
body, remorse and hopelessness the next morning. I got about 20 of them that I've underlined there. I won't read them all. I will put it in the notes, or if you want a copy, because it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's critical. That's critical to the first step, moving from hopelessness to hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You gotta first go to an experience of hopelessness before you can ever reach the hope. He calls it the jumping off point. It's a beautiful expression, once again. And here, let me read this quote. Dr. James contends that humans seem to have a built-in mechanism, especially during periods of despair or extreme soul sickness. Just as their exhausted old self is falling apart and dying away, they reach for a higher self, a sliver of hope that comes to light while the darkness falls. It's beautiful. It's that point. It's bottom, and many things can bring that about. And things that bring it about in one person will not even touch another person. My classic when I was a counselor was I had two guys in the group with me, and one was there because he killed 4 people in a DWI accident. He was drunk, and his lawyer said, you should go to treatment. And sitting right next to him was a guy who checked into treatment because he got drunk and missed his son's birthday, had grown up in an alcoholic home, and swore to God that was never going to happen to his kids. He was not going to subject them to what he went through. And when he did, boom, he reached it. And he got sober, and the DWI guy never did. So nothing to do with the consequence, it's the realization inside.
Yeah. And I'll bet you anything that the level of shame for both men was equal. That's the really interesting thing about where people are when they come into the rooms.
But did one feel it and the other not? Was one in touch with it and the other not? See, I think the DWI guy was a conniver. He wasn't. He was not in touch with his shame.
We'll see later on. Yeah, we'll see later on. William James tries to understand this, and he says, some people's access to the unconscious, the door is very wide open, and for some people, the door is almost shut.
That's right.
And he can't figure out why some people, the door to the unconscious, where William James believed the spiritual part of us lies.
Right.
And the access to that is breezier. It's a breezier open door. And for other people, the door is shut. And he said, I don't know. I can't explain this, but this is something that is part of the human condition.
And I think he's exactly right. I mean, that's my experience. You can hammer away at some of those guys, and it's just, you're not going to get anywhere. And then someone else just turns into a puddle. And it's like, I've been waiting for this all my life. Why? Because the door is open.
I know.
The door.
And then and one of the phrases he used, Bill, this is your business. This is your neck of the woods. He says one of the great mysteries of life is the eminence of grace. Where is the eminence of grace in human life? Sometimes it's not there. Sometimes it is there. But the eminence of grace is a beautiful phrase.
It is.
It should be there always, everywhere. But why are some people incapable of accessing it? That's one of the mysteries of life.
That's right. And to realize, even after all the years you've got, I've got, that in the end, this is a gift. At some level, this recovery business is a gift. That my door opened and this guy's didn't, you know?
Yep. And William James is so clear on that. You know, he says this access to a higher power and a jumping off to some sort of higher, better self, to a new center of heat away from the cold that cracks off. This is a gift, or it is nothing.
That's right.
He's really clear about that.
I'm glad you're hitting on this. I've got the quote right here. Throughout the ages, this crisis of soul sickness has led people to self-surrender to a higher power that seems to lurk on the edges of the subconscious. It doesn't matter where it is located, or even if it is a spiritual thing. What matters is only that the higher power helps the sick soul find relief from lifelong alienation. All that matters is that it works. He gets on board with this higher power and saves himself when his lower being has gone to pieces in the wreck. Yeah.
Love that stuff. It's so beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah. So it's a gift, or it is nothing. And he says that later on in the book, he starts to change the language a little bit. And he says that we jump on a higher power, even if this higher power is for a brief moment. Right?
That's right. You have an experience of it. And James was very big. I'm reading him again. You've opened the door to me. I had to dig out my my Varieties of Religious Experience book, and now it's really your book helps me make sense of that book, you know. And the word experience keeps coming through. Over and over. He brings examples of experiences. It's not theoretical stuff. This is what people are experiencing, you know? And then he parades dozens and dozens of them in front of his audience when he's given those lectures, you know, not literally, but you know, in quotations. And the evidence is overwhelming, you know? It's just difficult to put it in a science laboratory, which makes it so hard.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you see that the points coming through over and over again, but the chapter 1 and what we're covering now really brings the point home that it's private. It is strictly intuitive. It is emotional. It is experiential. It is deeply personal.
Right.
It is barely understandable to the person, never mind explainable to anybody else.
Right.
So don't try to look at this as some intellectual exercise. It is experiential. It works. If it works, you know, go with it.
I had when I was in counselor training, we had to deliver a lecture on each one of the steps, you know, and you might talk on 6, you might next month talk on 9 or whatever it might be. I had this teacher who said, always start with 1. If you, it's like starting to get on a ladder at step 6, you're going to miss it. If you don't go back to this soul sickness and this reaching out, you're going to be in theory land.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's not going to touch people.
And this is where he starts to as you and I were talking before in preparation for this, you know, this is where he begins to really bring home the point as well early on in the book that this is a passive affair. It's awfully passive. You don't really need to do anything. You just sort
of will it. You can't will it.
Yeah.
It happens to you. It happens to you.
Yeah. Right.
Let me read one. This is from a drug addict from James is talking about in his lecture. The woman says, I seem to be breaking down, being on the verge of insanity. I had taken all the narcotics, stopped all work, and in fact knew all the doctors in reach. But I never recovered permanently until I learned to stay in constant relation with the essence of life, which permeates us all. I turned to the very innermost, deepest consciousness of our real selves, or of God in us, illumination from within, with the essence of life which permeates us. We can call it whatever we wish. Only then do I discover the unreality of my past. The door opened for her. Something happened. And much of James's book is a reiteration and accumulation of stories to whom it happened. And that's why I think the big book, it was so necessary. It would be incomplete if you just published pages 1 through 164. It's not complete without the stories. It's only in that story that I come at it this way, you come at it that way, another person comes at it another way, but we all come at the same thing.
Yeah, and so I compared that lady that was one of William James' patients, probably in like 1901, to Marty Mann, whose chapter is called Women Suffer Too, in 1939. And she was given the galleys of the big book when she was in rehab. And she was under Dr. Tebow.
That's right, his care.
In Connecticut. And, by the way, she threw the galleys out the window.
I know that story. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So she was great. She's my
feisty.
favorite
She
character.
was feisty.
Yeah, she's my favorite character in all of the whole 12-step history. She's my favorite character. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Before we close, I do want to touch a little bit on William James and pragmatism, because I think in approaching, as we're going to the steps, that's the way he approached much of this transformation process. It's by the fruits you will know it, and it's almost like when we stand at step 1, keep your eye on step 12, because that's where I'm going to lead you. Okay, you're hopeless, and you need to have a spiritual experience or awakening in order to get there. So that's 12. That's where we're going. And now what 2 through 11 are going to do is help you open that door. That's all, that's all they're going to do, And if you understand that, it's not to worship the steps. It's not to memorize the steps. I thought I made actually good progress when I couldn't remember one of the steps one day. It was like, oh, you're doing better, Bill.
How funny. Yeah, exactly. And so if I could sum up step 1 from the point of view of what William James offered to Bill Wilson is basically that, that the essence of a spiritual experience in all of the people that I have helped, in how I have changed, in the history of the people that I show you over 2,500 years, is the following. We give our convulsive little selves a rest and realize that a higher power has been there all along.
That's right.
Right. And that is the essence of, and we hear that so often in AA, right? And we're coming in and we're wrecked and we're a disaster area and our lives are a mess. And someone says, oh, just sit down, have a coffee and a cookie and sit down and we'll be right with you. Yeah.
Right.
Just give your convulsive little self a rest and sit down and listen for a little bit. And all you got to do is show up for an hour. Don't do anything. For God's sakes, don't do anything. Just sit there, get a sponsor, listen carefully, and the rest is going to happen, right? It happens to you. And I think we don't give enough. We say, oh, you got to go to 90 meetings in 90 days and get a sponsor and do the steps. And I think we also need to say, let this happen to you, right? One of my old buddies used to call it osmosis. You sit your ass in the chair and you get osmosis.
Right.
Right. You just
That's
sit
right.
there and let it wash over you, and don't try too hard. I'm a hyper I'm a type hyper overachiever. I'm gay, and so I had to do everything 3 times harder, better than anybody else, just to feel equal. And so that was just causing so much havoc in my life, and I really had to learn to sit down, shut up, listen, and take it easy, and rest, and let this happen to me, right?
Yeah.
And William James's great phrase is, "This is a strictly passive affair," right? Those are the words he uses.
Right.
It's a strictly passive affair. This works by being passive, and that's a really new understanding of addiction that was not present in any addiction therapy, even up into maybe the 40s or 50s, right? Where the harder you work at it, the worse it gets. The more you give up, the better it gets. And that's why the notion of surrender is so vitally important to the transformation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't will it. I can't will it. It happens. You get broken. You get broken. Jung said, those who haven't found God probably haven't looked low enough.
And of course, you and I talked about this. Carl Jung. I believe William James gets short shrift in history because he was so hard to read.
Right.
Carl Jung studied under him in 1906 and 1907, shortly before William James died.
Right.
So a lot of Carl Jung stuff comes right out of William James. I am so convinced of that.
Since I started researching this to do this series of interviews with you, Paul, I'm seeing that all over the place. I'm seeing the seeds of Carl Jung's work in James's writings, and it's just wonderful. So, listen, I'm really excited, like I said, about doing this series, and I think it's going to be really, really helpful to folks out there. Give us a deeper appreciation for William James, but more important than that, a deeper understanding of just what's happening in this recovery process. So in the next episode, we're going to dig into steps 2 and 3, and this letting go and this being passive. How does that work? What seems to happen with people? And again, if I will put in the show notes a link to Paul's book, and really encourage you to read it. Also encourage you to read a biography. It's an intellectual biography of James by Robert Richardson. I found it really outstanding as well, to kind of put things in context. So put both of those in there. And
just started reading that last night.
You did get a copy?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
And starting with the 1906 earthquake is fascinating.
Yeah, and you're reading Emerson, I think, also by Richardson. Yeah, I'll have to get that one too. Anyway, listen, Paul, can't thank you enough, and I will look forward to our next episode, and we're going to have fun with this thing. So.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored. Thank you so much, Bill. It's really a great pleasure.
Great. Thank everybody for listening. If you want to reach Paul, you can send me an email at TwoWayPrayer@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to forward it to him over there in Barcelona. All right.
Great.
So thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Okay.
Keep coming back.